The first bucket Xander Hartley drew from the well that morning came up tasting of ash, though no fire burned within 50 miles of the valley. He set it aside without comment and drew another, then another, until the fifth bucket ran clear enough for the hives. The orchard stretched around him in neat rows, apple and pear trees heavy with green fruit that would not ripen for another month. Beyond the split-rail fence, the valley rolled away in alternating bands of farmland and forest, all of it tinder dry after a rainless June. Xander had lived here 32 years, the last 8 alone since his father died, and he knew the smell of distant smoke the way sailors knew the look of a changing sky. He said nothing about it when he walked into town that afternoon to buy wax cloth. The general store was full of the usual complaints about the heat, about the creek running low, about the price of everything. Xander nodded where nodding seemed required and paid for his goods in silence. On the walk home, he passed the fire watcher's cabin at the valley's eastern edge and saw her on the porch, writing something in a ledger with careful concentration. Orla Kincaid was not what most people expected in a fire watcher. She was an orc woman, green-skinned and small-tusked, but built soft rather than hard, with rounded shoulders and a comfortable middle that suggested she enjoyed her cooking. She moved without hurry, as though she had measured the world's pace and found it wanting. The valley had hired her 2 years ago when the previous watcher died, and no human could be found willing to work for the pittance the position paid. Some people still grumbled about it, but fires did not care about the watcher's ancestry, and Orla did her job. She looked up as Xander passed and lifted one hand in greeting. He returned the gesture and kept walking. They were not friends exactly, but they had developed the comfortable acquaintance of people who live near each other and make no demands. Sometimes she stopped by his orchard to check the fire break he maintained along his northern property line. Sometimes he left a jar of honey on her porch and found it replaced by a sack of the wild mushrooms she gathered on her ridgeline walks. That evening, as the sun set red through a haze that had not been there at dawn, Xander drew water again. The taste of ash was stronger. He stood by the well for a long time, watching the darkening sky, then went inside and began making a list of everything that would need to be moved if the fire came close. 3 days later, Orla knocked on his door just after sunrise. She was dusty from walking and carried a rolled map under one arm. "The fire is real," she said without preamble. 20 miles northeast in the high country. I saw the smoke column yesterday from Widow's Peak. The wind is pushing it this direction. Xander stepped aside to let her in. His kitchen was spare and clean, the table clear except for a single cup of tea. Orla unrolled her map and weighted the corners with whatever came to hand. A spoon, a candle, a smooth river stone Xander kept on the windowsill. "Here," she said, pointing to a mark she had made in pencil. "Started sometime in the last week, probably a lightning strike or a careless camp. It has had time to grow. With this wind and this dryness, it will move fast once it reaches the valley timber." "How long?" Xander asked. "A week, maybe less if the wind picks up. Maybe more if it rains, but I do not think it will rain." She looked at him with dark eyes that held no particular alarm, only the calm assessment of someone stating facts. Xander appreciated that. Panic helped nothing. "I am telling everyone who will listen," Orla continued. "The mayor, the sheriff, the larger farms. Some believe me, some do not, but you should prepare your property, widen your fire breaks, clear brush, move anything you cannot afford to lose." "The hives," Xander said. "Yes, and whatever you keep in your house that matters to you." She started to roll up the map, then paused. "Will you help me cut the northern fire break wider? The one that runs along the ridge behind your property. If we can make it broad enough, it might stop the fire before it reaches the valley proper, but it is too much work for one person." Xander did not hesitate. "When do we start?" "This afternoon, if you can spare the time. I have axes and shovels cached at the trailhead." They worked through the heat of that day and the next, cutting brush and small trees, scraping the ground down to mineral soil in a band 30 feet wide. It was brutal labor. The sun beat down without mercy, and the air tasted increasingly of smoke. Orla worked steadily, her movements economical and unhurried. She did not complain about the heat or the blisters forming on her palms. She simply worked. On the second day, during a brief rest, Xander offered her water from the canteen he had brought. She drank and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, leaving a smear of dirt across her cheek. "Thank you for helping," she said. "Most people think I am overreacting." "The well tastes of ash," Xander replied. "Has for days." Orla nodded slowly. "You notice things. I have seen that about you. You do not talk much, but you pay attention. Talking does not stop fires." She laughed at that, a low, warm sound. "No, it does not, though sometimes I wish it did. I have talked myself hoarse trying to convince the mayor to organize a proper response. He says he does not want to cause a panic over something that might not happen." "It will happen," Xander said. "Yes." Orla took another drink and handed back the canteen. "It will." Over the next days, they fell into a rhythm. Mornings, Xander worked his orchard and saw to his bees. Afternoons, he joined Orla on the fire break. Evenings, they parted ways, too tired for more than a brief goodnight. The work was hard and unglamorous, but it felt necessary in a way that satisfied something deep in Xander's nature. He had always been a man who prepared, who built, who made things secure against future storms. Orla was the same, he realized. She simply prepared against a different kind of storm. They did not talk much while they worked, but the silences were comfortable. Occasionally, Orla would point out something of interest. A hawk's nest in a dead tree, a patch of wild strawberries growing in unexpected abundance. Once she stopped mid-swing and tilted her head, listening to something Xander could not hear. When he gave her a questioning look, she said only, "The wind is changing." She was right. By evening, the wind had shifted to blow more directly from the northeast, and the smell of smoke was strong enough that even the skeptics in town began to worry. The mayor called a meeting. Xander did not usually attend such things, but Orla asked him to come, so he did. The town hall was packed, the air inside stifling. The mayor was a red-faced man named Garrett Pullman who owned the largest farm in the valley and was accustomed to being the most important person in any room. Orla stood before the assembly and explained the situation with the same calm directness she had shown Xander. She had drawn a new map showing the fire's likely path based on wind direction and fuel availability. She recommended that everyone begin preparations, clear brush from around buildings, wet down roofs, prepare to evacuate livestock and valuables. "With respect, Miss Kincaid," the mayor interrupted, "you are our fire watcher, not our fire maker. How do we know you are not exaggerating the danger to make your position seem more important?" A murmur ran through the crowd. Xander saw Orla's jaw tighten, but her voice remained steady. "You can see the smoke yourself from any high point. You can smell it. The evidence is there for anyone who cares to look." "Smoke does not mean the fire will reach us," someone called from the back. "The wind is pushing it directly toward us," Orla said. "The timber is dry. There has been no rain for weeks. These are facts, not exaggerations." "Or maybe," said a woman Xander recognized as the blacksmith's wife, "you know more about this fire than you are saying. Maybe someone who spends all her time in the woods might have made a careless mistake. A campfire left burning, perhaps." The room went very quiet. Xander felt anger rise in his chest, hot and unfamiliar. He was not a man given to strong emotions, but the injustice of the accusation cut through his usual reserve. "That is nonsense," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the silence. Heads turned toward him. "Orla has been warning us for days. She has been cutting fire breaks and preparing. Why would she do that if she caused the fire? Guilt makes people do strange things," the blacksmith's wife said. "So does stupidity," Xander replied, and several people gasped. The mayor raised his hands for calm. "Let us not fight among ourselves. Miss Kincaid, we appreciate your vigilance. I am sure we are all taking reasonable precautions, but I see no need for panic or for drastic measures that might disrupt the harvest." Orla rolled up her map, her face unreadable. "The fire does not care about your harvest schedule. Prepare or do not. I have done my duty." She walked out. Xander followed. Outside, the night air was thick with smoke and a few flakes of ash drifted down like gray snow. "They will not listen," Orla said quietly. "They would rather believe I am lying or incompetent or malicious than believe that something bad is coming." "Some will prepare," Xander said. "The smart ones." "Will it be enough?" He had no answer for that. The fire came 4 days later, faster than even Orla had predicted. Xander was moving his beehives when he heard the roar. It started as a distant sound, like wind through trees, then grew into something enormous and alive. He looked north and saw the wall of smoke rising above the ridge, boiling up into the sky in a column that turned the afternoon sun the color of blood. He had already moved half the hives to the root cellar under his house, along with his father's tools, his mother's quilts, and the few other things he could not replace. The rest of the hives would have to be abandoned. He made the decision in an instant and began running toward Orla's cabin. She was on her porch, watching the approaching fire with binoculars. When she saw him, she lowered them. "It jumped the fire break," she said. "The wind is too strong. It is throwing embers ahead of the main burn." "You need to leave," Xander said. "Now, I need to ring the warning bell. People need time to run." The warning bell was mounted on a post at the eastern edge of town, a 15-minute walk from where they stood. Xander looked at the fire, at the speed it was moving, and shook his head. "There is no time. Ring it or do not, but then you come with me. My cellar is stone and deep. We can survive there." Orla hesitated only a moment, then nodded. She ran for the bell and Xander ran with her. The air was growing hot, and embers were falling around them like malevolent fireflies. Orla reached the bell and hauled on the rope, sending the brazen clang echoing across the valley. She rang it 12 times, the traditional signal for fire, then let the rope fall. "Go," she said. "Run for your cellar, I will follow." "We go together," Xander said, and took her hand. They ran. Behind them, the fire crested the ridge and poured down into the valley like a breaking wave. Xander had seen forest fires before, but never anything like this. It was not just flame, but a living storm, feeding on itself, creating its own wind. Trees exploded in the heat. The air itself seemed to burn. They reached Xander's orchard as the first trees caught fire. The house was still untouched, but embers were thick as snow. Xander pulled Orla toward the cellar entrance, a wooden door set into the ground at an angle 20 feet from the house. He threw it open and shoved Orla inside, then followed and dragged the door shut above them. Darkness and sudden cool. The cellar was 12 feet square, dug deep into the hillside, with stone walls and a floor of packed earth. Xander had stocked it with water and supplies when he moved the hives. Now he groped his way to the water barrels and found the cloths he had left there. He soaked 2 of them and handed one to Orla. "Cover your face. Breathe through the cloth. It will filter the smoke." She took it without argument. In the faint light that leaked around the edges of the door, Xander could see her eyes, wide but calm. She was breathing hard from the run but not panicking. Above them the world ended. The roar of the fire was enormous, a sound that filled the cellar and shook the ground. Heat radiated through the door. Xander heard his house catch and burn, heard the timbers crack and fall. The orchard he had tended all his life was being consumed, and all he could do was sit in the dark and listen to it die. He sat beside Orla and felt her hand find his in the darkness. Her grip was strong and steady. They did not speak. There was nothing to say that would matter against the sound of the fire. Time became strange. Xander breathed through the wet cloth and held Orla's hand and waited. The heat grew until he thought the door would surely catch fire, but it held. The smoke thickened until every breath was an effort, but they kept breathing. At some point, Orla leaned against him, her head on his shoulder. He shifted to make her more comfortable and felt her arms slip around his waist. It was not romance, not then. It was simply two people holding each other against the dark and the fire, taking what comfort they could in not being alone. The fire burned through the valley in 5 hours, but it felt like days. Gradually, slowly, the roar diminished. The heat lessened. Xander could hear secondary sounds now. Things falling, wind moving through charred remains, the occasional crack of a burning tree finally collapsing. He did not open the door. Not yet. The fire might return, might flare up again. They would wait until sunrise, until he could be sure it was safe. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough from smoke. "Yes," Orla said. Her voice was steady. "Thank you for pulling me in here. I would not have made it to my own cabin." "Your cabin is gone," Xander said, "because there was no point in lying. I know. This whole section of the valley is gone. We will be lucky if anyone else survived." The weight of that settled over them. Xander thought of his neighbors, of the people at the town meeting who had dismissed Orla's warnings. He hoped they had heeded the bell, hoped they had run in time. But he feared many had not. "They will blame me," Orla said quietly. "When this is over, they will say I caused it. I am the fire watcher. I am the one who knew about it first. It will be easier to blame me than to accept that they should have listened." Xander tightened his arm around her. "Let them try. I will tell them the truth." "Will they believe you over their own suspicions?" He did not answer because he did not know. They sat in silence for a while longer. Then Orla said, "Why did you help me? Before all this? With the fire break, with speaking for me at the meeting?" "You did not have to do any of that. You were doing the right thing," Xander said. "That should not be a solitary burden. Many people would have let me bear it alone, because I am an orc, because it is easier not to get involved." Xander considered this. It was true that prejudice against orcs ran deep in human communities. He had grown up hearing the old stories, orcs as raiders, as savages, as monsters. But he had also grown up watching his father judge people by their actions, not their ancestry. When Orla had come to the valley, she had been quiet and competent, and had asked nothing more than to be allowed to do her job. That had been enough for Xander. "I have no patience for stupidity," he said finally. "And it is stupid to ignore someone who knows what they are talking about just because of what they look like." Orla laughed, a brief huff of air. "You are a strange man, Xander Hartley. So I have been told." The darkness softened gradually as the night wore on. Xander dozed a little, his back against the stone wall, Orla warm against his side. He woke to find her asleep, her breathing deep and even, and felt a fierce protectiveness settle over him. She had tried to save the valley. She had warned them, prepared them, done everything in her power. If they blamed her for this, it would be an injustice he could not stomach. When the first gray light of dawn began to seep around the door, Xander carefully extracted himself from Orla's side and climbed the steps. He pushed the door open slowly, not knowing what he would find. The world outside was gray and black and white. Ash covered everything like snow. The house was gone, burned to its foundation. The orchard was a graveyard of charred sticks. The entire valley, as far as he could see, had been scoured clean. Smoke still rose in thin columns from 1,000 small fires, but the main burn had passed. Orla came up behind him and stood looking out at the devastation. Her face was smudged with soot, her clothes filthy, but she stood straight. "It could have been worse," she said. "If it had come at night, more people would have died in their sleep. The bell gave them warning." "Your bell," Xander said. "Our bell. You helped me reach it." They climbed out of the cellar and walked through the ash. Xander's entire life had been reduced to whatever he had managed to stuff into the cellar and whatever had survived there. His orchard was destroyed. His house was rubble. But he was alive, and Orla was alive, and for the moment that was enough. Other survivors began to emerge as the morning progressed. The mayor's farm, being on the western edge of the valley, had been spared the worst. The sheriff's house had burned, but the sheriff himself had evacuated in time. In all, 12 people had died in the fire, most of them elderly or infirm who could not move quickly enough when the warning came. By midday, a makeshift camp had formed near the river, where the fire had not been able to cross. People gathered there, stunned and grieving, trying to make sense of what they had lost. Xander and Orla walked into the camp and were met with stares. The blacksmith's wife was there, her face streaked with tears, her home gone. When she saw Orla, her expression hardened. "You," she said, pointing, "you did this." A murmur ran through the gathered survivors. Orla stood very still. "I did not," she said quietly. "I warned you. I told you the fire was coming. I rang the bell." "You are the fire watcher," the woman said. "You were in the woods." "Who is to say you did not start it?" "That is insane," Xander said, stepping forward. "Orla has been trying to save this valley for weeks. If you had listened to her, more people would have survived. Or maybe she set the fire and then pretended to warn us to cover her tracks," said another voice. It was one of the farmers, a man named Brennan who had lost his barn. "Orcs are not to be trusted. Everyone knows that." "Everyone knows nothing," Xander said, his voice hard. "You are looking for someone to blame because you are angry and hurt. But blaming Orla will not bring back your homes or your loved ones." "Then who do we blame?" the blacksmith's wife demanded. "The fire just happened. These things have causes, boy." "Yes," said a new voice. "They do." An old man stepped forward from the crowd. His name was Silas Tarot, and he had a small homestead on the northeastern edge of the valley. Xander knew him as a quiet man who kept to himself. "I saw who started the fire," Silas said. "Or near enough. There have been charcoal burners working in the high country the past month. Unlicensed, working on crown land without permission. I saw their kilns. 3 of them poorly tended. One must have gotten away from them." "Do you have proof?" the mayor asked. "I can show you where they were. The kilns will still be there, or what is left of them. And I saw the men. I can describe them." The attention shifted away from Orla, at least for the moment. The mayor organized a group to ride out with Silas and investigate. Xander was not invited, which suited him fine. He had no interest in hunting down the burners. He only cared that Orla was safe from false accusation. But the suspicion did not fully lift. Over the following days, as people began the grim work of salvaging what they could and burying the dead, Xander heard the whispers. Some people still believed Orla had caused the fire. Others thought she had at least been negligent in her duties. The fact that she had warned them, had tried to prepare them, seemed to count for nothing in the face of their grief and need for a scapegoat. Xander and Orla stayed together in the days after the fire. There was nowhere else to go. They camped near the cellar, using salvaged materials to build a crude lean-to for shelter. Xander's beehives in the cellar had survived, and he moved them out into the ash field, hoping they would find enough unburned wildflowers to sustain themselves. Orla helped him, working without complaint, though Xander could see the weight of the valley's suspicion pressing on her. "You should leave," he said one evening as they ate a sparse meal of cornmeal mush and dried apples from the cellar stores. "Go somewhere you are not known. Start fresh." Orla shook her head. "I will not run from false accusations. I did nothing wrong. If I leave, it will look like an admission of guilt. Staying may be worse. People are angry. Anger makes them do foolish things. Let them be angry. I am angry too. Angry that they did not listen, angry that people died who might have lived, angry that I am being blamed for trying to help." She set down her bowl. "But I will not give them the satisfaction of seeing me flee." Xander nodded. He understood stubbornness. He was stubborn himself. "Then I will stay with you," he said. "Whatever comes." Orla looked at him across the small fire they had built. "Why, you have lost everything already. You do not need to tie yourself to me and lose more." "I have not lost everything. The cellar survived. The hives survived. And I did not lose you." The words hung in the air between them. It was the closest Xander had come to naming the feeling that had been growing in him over the past weeks. It was not just respect or friendship, though it was those things. It was something deeper, something that had taken root during the long hours of working side by side, of sitting in the dark together while the world burned above them. Orla's expression softened. "You are a good man, Xander Hartley, better than I deserve." "You deserve better than suspicion and blame," Xander said. "And if the valley cannot see that, then the valley is blind." She smiled then, a real smile that reached her eyes. It transformed her face, made her beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional beauty and everything to do with the warmth and strength he saw there. "We make quite a pair," she said. "The quiet beekeeper and the orc fire watcher that nobody trusts." "Let them talk," Xander said. "We have work to do." The work was survival at first. Then, as the days passed, it became recovery. The mayor's investigative party returned with evidence. The remains of 3 charcoal kilns, poorly constructed and carelessly maintained, and the testimony of a witness who had seen the burners fleeing the fire. But the burners themselves had vanished, presumably having left the region as soon as they realized what they had done. The evidence should have cleared Orla, but it did not entirely. Some people accepted it. Others remained suspicious, unwilling to let go of their need to blame someone they could see and reach. Orla remained calm through it all, but Xander could see the toll it took on her. She grew quieter, more withdrawn. She did her work helping to clear debris, assisting with the injured, doing whatever needed doing, but the light had gone out of her eyes. 3 weeks after the fire, a representative from the Crown's forestry court arrived. His name was Aldrich Pemberton, and he was a thin, precise man with ink-stained fingers and a ledger under his arm. He interviewed survivors, examined the burn scar, and reviewed Orla's fire watch reports. Xander testified on her behalf, describing her warnings and her efforts to prepare the valley. Silas Tarot testified about the charcoal burners. The mayor, to his credit, admitted that Orla had tried to warn them and that he had dismissed her concerns. Pemberton spent a week gathering information, then called a public meeting. The entire valley turned out, those who remained. Xander stood beside Orla at the back of the gathering, ready to defend her if the crowd turned ugly. "I have completed my investigation," Pemberton announced. "The fire that destroyed this valley was caused by unlicensed charcoal burners operating illegally on Crown land. Miss Kincaid, the appointed fire watcher, performed her duties admirably. She identified the threat early, issued multiple warnings, and took reasonable steps to mitigate the danger. The failure was not hers. The failure was yours. He looked around at the assembled survivors, his expression stern. You were warned. Your fire watcher provided accurate information and sound advice. You chose not to heed it, for reasons that seem to have had more to do with prejudice than with judgment. 12 people died as a result. That is a hard lesson, but perhaps it is one you needed to learn. A heavy silence fell over the gathering. Pemberton consulted his ledger. As for the charcoal burners, they have been apprehended in a town 40 miles north. They will face trial and, if convicted, will be required to pay restitution to this valley for the damages they caused. The funds will be held in trust and used for replanting and rebuilding. How much? Someone asked. Enough to replant the timber and provide seed for a new orchard, Pemberton said. It will not replace what was lost, but it is a beginning. He closed his ledger and looked at Orla. Miss Kincaid, the Crown recognizes your service and your competence. Effective immediately, you are promoted to the position of Valley Warden, with the authority to enforce fire safety regulations, close forested areas to entry during high-risk periods, and levy fines for violations. Your salary will be adjusted accordingly. Orla blinked, clearly surprised. Thank you. Do not thank me. You earned it. This valley is fortunate to have you, whether they realize it or not. The meeting ended. People dispersed, many of them looking chastened. A few approached Orla to offer quiet apologies. She accepted them with grace, though Xander could see the wariness in her eyes. Trust, once broken, was not easily repaired. That evening, Xander and Orla sat by their fire and let the weight of the day settle. A warden, Orla said, shaking her head. With authority, I never expected that. You deserve it, Xander said. You did everything right. It is about time someone recognized that. It does not bring back the people who died. No, but it might prevent future deaths. That is worth something. Orla nodded slowly. She poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the night. What will you do now? You cannot live in a lean-to forever. Rebuild, Xander said. The foundation of the house is still good. I can use the stone from the chimney, salvage what timber survived. It will not be quick, but I have time. And the orchard, the trees are gone, but I still have the land and the knowledge to plant new ones. In a few years there will be apples again. Years, Orla repeated. That is a long time to wait. Good things are worth waiting for. She looked at him then, and something shifted in her expression. Are they? Xander met her gaze. The fire cast flickering shadows across her face, highlighting the green of her skin, the small tusks that curved up from her lower jaw, the strength and gentleness that lived in her eyes. He had spent weeks working beside her, had sat with her in the dark while the world burned, had defended her against unjust accusations. Somewhere in all of that, his feelings for her had deepened from respect to something he could no longer ignore. Yes, he said quietly, they are. Orla set down the stick. Xander, I need to know something. When you defended me, when you stayed with me after the fire, was it because you felt you owed me? Because I am your warden and you thought it was your duty? No. Then why? He took a breath. Words had never come easily to him, but Orla deserved the truth, however clumsily he might express it. Because when I am with you, the world makes sense. Because you are brave and stubborn and kind, and I have never met anyone like you. Because when I held you in the cellar, I realized that if the fire took everything else, as long as you survived, I would be all right. He paused, then added, and because I am falling in love with you. Have been for a while now, I think. Orla's eyes widened. For a long moment she said nothing, and Xander braced himself for rejection. He had laid his heart bare, and he knew it might not be enough. She was the valley's warden now, with responsibilities and a position to maintain. He was just a beekeeper with a burned orchard and a stubborn refusal to give up. Then she smiled, that same warm smile that transformed her face. "You truly are a strange man, but I think that is what I like about you." "Is that a yes?" Xander asked. "It is a yes to exploring this, whatever this is. I care for you, Xander, more than I expected to, but I am also afraid. People here are only just beginning to accept me. If we become something more, it will give them another reason to doubt me, to say I am manipulating you or that you are making a foolish choice. Let them say it. I do not care what they think." "But I do," Orla said gently. "Not because their opinions matter more than my feelings, but because I have to work with these people. I have to live among them. If they see me as a threat or a manipulator, I cannot do my job." Xander understood, though it frustrated him. "Then what do you want to do?" "I want to be careful. I want to give people time to see that I am here to help, not to harm. And I want to give us time to be sure this is real and not just the result of surviving something terrible together." It was sensible, and Xander could not argue against sense. But he also knew what he felt, and time would not change it. "All right," he said. "We will be careful, but Orla, I am sure. Whatever time proves, I am already sure." She reached across the fire and took his hand. "Then time will just have to catch up." The autumn came, and with it the work of rebuilding. Xander cleared the foundation of his house and began laying new timber. It was slow work, but he did not mind. He had learned patience from his bees, who built their hives one cell at a time and never hurried. Orla helped when her duties allowed, and they fell into the same comfortable rhythm they had found before the fire. They worked side by side, spoke little, and found contentment in the shared labor. The valley around them was changing too. The Forestry Court's restitution fund had been established, and crews arrived to begin replanting the burned timber. The blackened hillsides slowly gave way to rows of seedlings, small and fragile but promising. Some of the farmers who had lost their land chose to leave, but others stayed and began again. The valley, like Xander, was stubborn. Orla's new authority as warden came with challenges. She closed certain forested areas to entry during dry periods, which angered hunters and trappers. She levied fines against a logging crew that violated safety regulations, which made her unpopular with the timber merchants. But she was fair and consistent, and gradually people began to respect her, even if they did not always like her decisions. Xander watched her grow into the role and felt a quiet pride. She was good at this, good at balancing the needs of the people with the needs of the land. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the valley's attitude toward her shifted. She was no longer just the orc warden. She was their warden. It was a small distinction, but it mattered. As for their relationship, they remained careful. They did not flaunt their feelings, did not give the gossips anything to latch onto. But they also did not hide. Orla continued to help Xander with his rebuilding. Xander continued to attend the valley meetings and support Orla's decisions. People saw them together often enough that it became normal, unremarkable. And in the private moments, when they were alone by the fire or walking the fire breaks, they allowed themselves to be more. A hand held, a head on a shoulder, a kiss stolen in the twilight. It was not a grand romance, but it was real, and it was theirs. Winter arrived, blanketing the valley in snow that mercifully hid the worst of the burned scars. Xander's house was half rebuilt by then, enough to provide shelter from the cold. He moved his stores up from the cellar and set up a small workshop where he could build furniture and repair his equipment. Orla spent more time there than at the warden's cabin, which had been rebuilt on the same site as her old one. It was an unspoken arrangement, comfortable and domestic. One evening, as they sat by the fire in Xander's new house, Orla said, Do you ever think about what would have happened if the fire had not come? Xander looked up from the piece of harness he was mending. In what way would we have met, become friends? Or would we have just gone on living near each other, polite but distant? I like to think we would have found our way to each other eventually, Xander said. But I do not know. Maybe the fire was necessary, not the destruction but the urgency. It forced us to see what mattered. Orla nodded slowly. I hate that people died. I hate that so much was lost. But I cannot bring myself to regret what came after. Is that selfish? It is human, or orc as the case may be. Xander set aside the harness. We cannot undo the past. All we can do is build something good from what remains. You are wise for a beekeeper. Bees are excellent teachers, she laughed, and the sound filled the small room with warmth. Xander crossed to sit beside her, and she leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire burn down to embers. Xander, Orla said eventually, what do you want? For the future, I mean, beyond rebuilding your house and replanting your orchard. It was a question Xander had been asking himself for weeks. He thought about his life before the fire, solitary, stable, predictable. It had been a good life, but it had also been lonely. The fire had destroyed that life, but it had also shown him what he had been missing. I want you, he said simply. Not hidden, not careful. I want to wake up beside you and work beside you and grow old beside you. I want people to know that you are mine and I am yours, and I do not care what they think about it. Orla pulled back to look at him, her eyes searching his face. You are asking me to marry you. Yes, if you will have me. This will not be easy. There will be people who disapprove, who think you are making a mistake or that I am taking advantage of you. I know. And we will be building everything from nothing. Your orchard will take years to produce. My position is secure now, but it could change if the political winds shift. I know that too. Then why ask? Xander took her hands in his. Because a life with you, even a hard one, is better than an easy life alone. Because you make me want to be more than I am. Because when I think about the future, I cannot imagine it without you in it. Orla's eyes shone with unshed tears. You terrify me, Xander Hartley. You offer me everything I want and everything I am afraid to want all at once. Is that a yes or a no? She laughed through the tears. It is a yes, you impossible man. Yes, I will marry you. Yes, I will build a life with you. Yes to all of it, even though it terrifies me. Xander kissed her then, a long, slow kiss that tasted of smoke and honey and the promise of better days. When they finally pulled apart, he said, we should wait until spring, give people time to get used to the idea. Or we could marry now in the middle of winter and let them talk all they want, Orla said with a grin. I thought you wanted to be careful. I am tired of being careful. I am tired of worrying about what people think. You are right. This is ours and we should not have to hide it. So they were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the valley's new church. The priest was a kindly old man who had lost his own home in the fire and had no patience for prejudice. He married them without hesitation, and a handful of witnesses attended. Silas Tarot, the mayor, the sheriff, and a few others who had come to respect Orla over the months since the fire. It was not a grand affair. Orla wore a simple dress she had sewn herself. Xander wore his best shirt and a vest his mother had made years ago. They exchanged vows in front of the small gathering, promised to love and honor each other, and sealed it with a kiss. Afterward, there was a modest meal at the mayor's house, and then they walked home through the snow to the house Xander had built. Well, Orla said as they stood on the threshold, we are married. We are, Xander agreed. And now what? Now we live. We work. We build. Same as before, but together. Orla smiled and took his hand. I can live with that. They crossed the threshold together and closed the door on the winter cold. The spring came late that year, but when it arrived with a vengeance. The snow melted, the rivers swelled, and the valley turned green almost overnight. The seedlings that had been planted on the hillsides put out new growth, and wildflowers bloomed in the ash-enriched soil. It was not the valley it had been, but it was alive and growing. Xander planted his new orchard in April, working from dawn to dusk to get the saplings into the ground before the weather turned too warm. Orla helped, as did a few neighbors who had come to accept the marriage and wanted to offer their support. It was hard work, but satisfying. By the end of the month, row after row of young apple and pear trees stood where the old orchard had been. "They will not produce for 3 years," Xander said, surveying the work. "Maybe 4. Then we have time to prepare," Orla said. She was standing beside him, her hand resting on her belly in a gesture that had become habitual over the past few weeks. Xander had noticed, but he had not said anything, waiting for her to tell him. Now he looked at her, a question in his eyes. Orla smiled. "I think I am pregnant." "It is early yet, too early to be certain, but I think so." Joy washed over Xander, sudden and overwhelming. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing a midwife. I have missed my courses and I have been sick in the mornings. It seems likely." Xander pulled her into his arms, careful not to squeeze too hard. "A child, our child. Are you happy?" "Happier than I have words for." They stood together in the orchard, surrounded by the small trees that would one day grow tall and bear fruit, and let the happiness settle over them. It was another beginning, another seed planted in hope. The midwife confirmed Orla's suspicion a week later. The baby would come in late autumn, around the time of the first frost. Orla took the news calmly, but Xander could see the excitement beneath her composure. She began preparing immediately, sewing blankets and tiny clothes, clearing space in the house for a cradle Xander would build. The valley's reaction to the news was mixed. Some people were genuinely happy for them. Others were less enthusiastic, uncomfortable with the idea of a half-orc child. Xander did not care. His child would be loved and wanted, and that was all that mattered. As the summer progressed, Orla's pregnancy became more visible. She continued her warden's duties as long as she was able, then reluctantly handed over some of the more strenuous tasks to a deputy the mayor had hired. Xander fretted over her, worried she was working too hard, but Orla waved off his concerns. "I am pregnant, not fragile," she said. "I can still walk the fire breaks and check the water sources. I will know when I need to rest." She was right, of course. She always seemed to know her own limits, but Xander could not help worrying. He had already lost so much. The thought of losing her or the baby was unbearable. In August, the forestry court held a public trial for the charcoal burners. Xander and Orla attended, along with most of the valley. The burners were found guilty of criminal negligence and sentenced to pay restitution as well as serve time in the Crown's labor camps. The restitution funds were handed over to the valley, and the mayor announced that they would be used to continue the replanting efforts and to establish a proper fire watch station with updated equipment. "It is justice," Orla said as they walked home from the trial. "Not perfect, but justice nonetheless. Does it feel like enough?" Xander asked. "It will have to be. The dead cannot be brought back and the past cannot be changed, but perhaps this will prevent future tragedies." As autumn approached, the valley began to prepare for the harvest. The crops had been sparse in the fire-damaged soil, but enough had survived to see everyone through the winter. Xander's beehives had produced a modest amount of honey, which he traded for supplies and saved for the baby's arrival. Orla grew rounder and slower, her movements more deliberate. She spent more time at home, resting when Xander insisted and working on small projects when he was not looking. She was stubborn and independent, and Xander loved her all the more for it. The baby came on a cold night in late October. The labor was long and difficult, and Xander paced the house like a caged animal while the midwife worked. He had faced fire and loss and suspicion, but nothing had prepared him for the helplessness of waiting while Orla labored to bring their child into the world. Finally, as the first light of dawn touched the horizon, the baby's cry filled the house. The midwife emerged from the bedroom, smiling. "A girl," she said, "healthy and strong, and your wife is well, though tired." Xander rushed past her into the bedroom. Orla was propped up against the pillows, her face pale and damp with sweat, but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and when she pulled back the blanket, Xander saw his daughter for the first time. She was beautiful. She had Orla's green skin, though lighter, and small buds where tusks would eventually grow. Her ears were slightly pointed, her eyes dark and alert. She looked like both of them and neither of them, something entirely new. "What should we name her?" Orla asked, her voice hoarse from the labor. Xander had thought about this, had considered a dozen names over the past months, but now, looking at his daughter, only one name seemed right. "Petra," he said. "After the stone that held us safe when the fire came." Orla smiled. "Petra Hartley, I like it." They spent the day in quiet joy, marveling at the tiny person they had created, learning her rhythms and her cries. The midwife stayed until evening, making sure both mother and baby were stable, then left with instructions and a promise to return in a few days. That night, Xander sat by the fire with Petra in his arms while Orla slept. The baby was awake, staring up at him with solemn eyes, and he talked to her in a low voice, telling her about the orchard and the bees and the valley she would grow up in. "Your mother is the bravest person I know," he said. "She saved this valley even when people did not want to be saved, and she saved me too in a different way. You are lucky to have her as your mother." Petra made a small sound, not quite a cry, and Xander adjusted his hold on her. He had never held anything so fragile, so precious. The weight of responsibility settled over him, but it was a good weight, a welcome one. "I promise I will keep you safe," he whispered. "I will teach you to be strong and kind and stubborn like your mother. And I will love you every day of your life, no matter what." As if in answer, Petra's tiny hand closed around his finger, and Xander felt his heart expand to hold the enormity of his love for her. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and exhausted days. Petra was a demanding baby, hungry and loud, but Xander and Orla rose to meet her needs with a patience born of love. The valley's reaction to her birth was varied, but most people were kind. A few brought gifts, blankets, clothes, toys carved from wood. Even the blacksmith's wife, who had once accused Orla of starting the fire, stopped by with a tiny knitted cap and an awkward apology. "I was wrong about you," she said to Orla. "About many things. I hope you can forgive me." Orla accepted the apology and the cap with grace. "We all do things we regret when we are in pain. What matters is that you are trying to make amends." Winter came again, and with it the quiet rhythm of life in a small valley. Xander worked on his house and his equipment, preparing for the coming year. Orla resumed her duties as warden, bringing Petra with her when she could and leaving her with Xander when the work was too dangerous. They managed, as people do, finding balance and joy in the small moments. In the spring, when Petra was 6 months old, Xander took her out to see the orchard. The saplings had survived the winter and were putting out new growth, their branches covered in delicate blossoms. Petra, strapped to his chest in a sling Orla had made, looked around with wide eyes, taking in the world. "This will be yours one day," Xander told her. "The orchard, the bees, all of it. Your mother and I are building this for you. Petra grabbed at a blossom, and Xander gently redirected her hand. She laughed, a bright bubbling sound, and Xander felt his chest tighten with emotion. This was what they had survived the fire for. Not just to live, but to build something worth living for. Orla joined them in the orchard a short while later, carrying a basket of tools. She had been checking the fire breaks, making sure they were clear and ready for the dry season. She looked tired but content, and when she saw Xander and Petra among the trees, she smiled. She is going to be a farmer like her father, Orla said, coming to stand beside them. Or a warden like her mother, Xander replied. Or something entirely her own, we cannot know yet. No. But we can give her the tools to choose. They stood together in the orchard, the three of them, and looked out over the valley. It was scarred but healing, marked by loss but full of new growth. The future was uncertain, as all futures were, but it was theirs to shape. That summer, the first of the replanted timber on the hillsides began to show real growth. The valley organized a celebration to mark the occasion, a small festival with food and music and games. Xander and Orla attended with Petra, who was now old enough to sit up and watch the festivities with fascination. The mayor gave a speech, thanking everyone who had contributed to the valley's recovery. He made special mention of Orla, praising her service as warden and her role in preparing the valley for future fires. The applause was genuine, and Xander felt a fierce pride as he watched Orla accept the recognition with her usual quiet dignity. Later, as they walked home through the twilight, Orla said, "It feels strange to be thanked. For so long I was blamed. I am not sure I know how to accept gratitude." "You will learn," Xander said. "The same way you learned everything else, by doing it," she laughed. "I suppose so." Petra, drowsing in Orla's arms, made a small, sleepy sound. Orla kissed the top of her head and adjusted the blanket around her. "Do you think she will remember any of this? The fire, the rebuilding?" She was not born yet when the fire happened, and she will be too young to remember the rebuilding. But she will grow up with the results of it. She will see the new orchard and the new timber, and know that good things can grow from ashes. That is a good lesson to learn. They reached the house and went inside. Xander lit the lamps while Orla settled Petra into her cradle. The baby fussed for a moment, then settled, her eyes drifting closed. Orla stood watching her, one hand resting on the edge of the cradle. "She is so small," Orla said softly, "and the world is so big and dangerous. How do we protect her from all of it?" "We cannot," Xander said, coming to stand beside her. "But we can teach her to be strong. We can love her and give her a good foundation, and we can trust that she will find her own way the way we did." Orla nodded. "You are right, I just worry." "So do I think that is what parents do." They left Petra sleeping and went to sit by the fire. It had become their habit, these quiet evenings, to sit together and talk about the day or simply be silent in each other's company. It was a simple life, but it was theirs, and they had built it from nothing. "Do you ever think about the cellar?" Orla asked. "That night we spent there waiting for the fire to pass." "Sometimes," Xander admitted. "It was the worst night of my life, but also, in a strange way, one of the best. Because it was the night I knew for certain that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with you." "I think I knew before that," Orla said. "But I was too afraid to admit it, afraid of what people would say, afraid of what it would mean. The fire burned away a lot of that fear. It made me realize that life is too short to waste on worrying about other people's opinions." "I am glad you came to that realization," Xander said. "Even if I wish it had not taken a fire to get you there." Orla leaned against him, and he wrapped his arm around her. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance in the hearth. Outside, the valley was quiet, the night peaceful. It was a far cry from the chaos and destruction of the fire, and Xander was grateful for every moment of it. The years passed as years do. Petra grew into a lively, curious child with her mother's stubbornness and her father's quiet determination. She spent her days exploring the orchard, helping Xander with the bees, and accompanying Orla on her warden rounds. The valley, once wary of the half-orc child, grew to accept and even love her. She was simply Petra, the Hartley girl, and that was enough. The orchard matured, and in the 4th year after planting, it produced its first real crop. The apples were small and tart, but they were apples, and Xander felt a deep satisfaction as he picked them. Orla made pies and preserves, and they sold the surplus at the market. It was not a fortune, but it was a living, and it was honest work. Orla's reputation as warden grew. She was consulted on fire safety measures by neighboring valleys and invited to speak at regional forestry meetings. She took the recognition in stride, always coming home to the valley and to her family. She loved her work, but she loved Xander and Petra more. On a spring day 5 years after the fire, Xander and Orla stood in the orchard and looked out over the valley. The hillsides were green with young timber, the farms were productive again, and the scars of the fire were fading. It would never be exactly as it had been, but it was whole again in a new way. "We did this," Orla said, gesturing at the orchard and the valley beyond. "We helped build this." "You did most of it," Xander said. "You saved the valley, I just planted some trees." Orla laughed. "You are too modest. This orchard is beautiful, and it will feed people for generations." Petra came running up then, her face flushed with excitement. She was 5 years old now, tall for her age and strong. Her green skin had darkened slightly as she grew, and her small tusks were beginning to show when she smiled. "Papa, Mama, look what I found." She held out her hand, and in it was a small wooden carving, weathered and half buried in the ash soil. It was a bee, expertly carved with delicate wings and a rounded body. Xander took it from her and turned it over in his hands. He recognized the work. His father had carved it years ago, one of a set he had made to amuse Xander as a child. Xander had thought they were all lost in the fire. "This is special," he told Petra. "My father made this when I was young. I thought it was gone forever." "Can I keep it?" Petra asked. "Of course." "It is yours now." Petra clutched the carving to her chest, delighted. Then she ran off again, no doubt to add it to the collection of treasures she kept in her room. Xander watched her go, then looked at Orla. "She is growing so fast." "Children do," Orla said. "Before we know it, she will be grown and making her own way in the world. That is years away yet. Not as many as you think." They stood together in the orchard, the trees blooming around them, and let the peace of the moment settle. The fire had taken so much, but it had also given them something precious, each other and the life they had built together. It was not the life Xander had imagined before the fire, but it was better, richer, more full of love and purpose. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the orchard, Xander took Orla's hand. "You remember," he said, "when you asked me what I wanted for the future?" "I do," Orla said. "And you said you wanted me, that you wanted to wake up beside me and work beside me and grow old beside me." "I still want that. Every day I still want that." Orla smiled, the smile that had first captured his heart and continued to do so. "Then you are a fortunate man, Xander Hartley, because that is exactly what you have." They walked back to the house together as the twilight deepened. Petra was already inside, chattering to herself as she played with her new treasure. The lights were warm in the windows, and smoke rose gently from the chimney. It was home, built from ashes and love and stubborn determination. And as Xander stepped through the door with Orla beside him, he knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together. The fire had tested them and had not found them wanting. They had survived, rebuilt, and thrived, and in the end that was all anyone could ask for. The valley was whole. The orchard was growing, and the Hartley family, forged in fire and built on love, was exactly where they belonged.